Yesterday, I was browsing on YouTube and I saw a video by John MacArthur of Grace Community Church. Now, if you come from Christianity, especially conservative or evangelical Christianity, you probably know that name. He is a very popular pastor. His church has, I think, over 8,000 members. His YouTube channel has over 700,000 subscribers. And this video that I saw that caught my eye was titled Christian Deconstruction. And it had been posted one day prior, and it already had 40,000 something views. So this was a very popular topic, and I thought this might be interesting to watch, to hear some of these things that are being very confidently stated. That some of it really shocked me, some of it really concerned me, and it concerned me that so many eyes and ears are on this man, soaking in his message and accepting what he says as truth. And so, as someone who is deconstructing from Christianity, has deconstructed from Christianity, I thought it would be interesting to offer my perspective on some of the things that he was saying in this sermon. I've got my coffee and my Alice in Wonderland mug, and I'm ready to hear what he has to say. So he starts off his sermon reading from John 6, and here there's a situation going on where some disciples are walking away from Jesus, and they are leaving, abandoning the faith, and this is what he has to say.
This passage introduces us to a biblical case, you could say, of Christian deconstruction. People who abandon the faith.
Already, not even 5 minutes in, and he has presented a completely false narrative, a false definition of deconstruction. Deconstruction is not abandoning your faith. That's not what that means. Some people do abandon the faith as they or after they deconstruct, but that's not always the end result. It's not deconversion. That's a totally different thing. It's deconstruction. And what Johnny here fails to recognize is that a lot of people actually deconstruct their Christian beliefs and remain Christian. They just have sorted through their beliefs to make sure that what they believe holds true and that it rings true for them. You don't have to abandon your faith to deconstruct. Deconstruction is all about taking the beliefs that you hold, especially beliefs that were given to you by other people, that were indoctrinated into you from birth. It's taking these beliefs and carefully, critically examining them to make sure that what you believe is true. And everyone should be doing that. Everyone should be taking their beliefs and examining them to make sure that they hold true. Because what if you believe something that's not true? How are you going to know it's not true if you don't actually examine it and make sure? And I would argue that John here actually agrees that deconstruction is a very good thing and is necessary in the life of every person, and especially every Christian. He just doesn't realize what deconstruction is. But in just a minute, he's going to actually explain in his sermon, he's going to tell people that they should be deconstructing. He just doesn't use that word, but we'll get to that.
It's a very big movement today in our world. Understandably, I get it. I know why there are so many defectors from Christianity, so many who are calling themselves exvangelicals or XVs or Christian deconstructionists, or hashtag empty the pews, or whatever else. The reason there are so many is because there are so many false Christians.
So this is what's known as the no true Scotsman fallacy. It's when you paint everyone else out to be not a true Christian if they don't align with your specific doctrine or ideologies. There's no way to actually prove that these aren't true or genuine Christians. It's just an accusation that's thrown out to make it seem like everyone else doesn't know what they're talking about, but you do. I think it's really interesting that he says the reason so many people are leaving the church is because of false Christians. The reason people are leaving the church, according to Pew Research, is because they just stopped believing. They don't believe anymore. It's not believable. You don't have compelling enough evidence for people to want to stay.
There are two categories of false disciples, two categories of false Christians. Category number one, those who find out at the judgment. Those are the people who think they're Christians all the way through their life, only to find out that when they face God, he never knew them, Matthew 7, right?
Imagine spending your entire life dedicated to Jesus. You go to church, you worship, you read your Bible, you live your life as to be as good of a person as you can. You live by the teachings of Jesus. You do everything you think you're supposed to do. And then you get to heaven and you're standing before God and he looks at you and he says, I don't know you. You're going to hell. Like God's gonna gaslight you when you get there. Like you spent your whole life worshiping him and having a relationship with him, and he's gonna pretend like he never knew you. This idea that you could be deceived into having a fake relationship with Jesus, that you could worship God the wrong way or think that you're worshiping God and really you're not. That idea is so damaging, it's so harmful, especially with people who have issues with anxiety, paranoia. I was one of those people, especially as a kid. I was always afraid that I wasn't a true Christian or I didn't say the prayer the right way. I wasn't really saved. Like, who's doing the deceiving? Well, they say Satan is behind it all, but God's the one that put Satan here to allow him to deceive people. And so really it's all God's responsibility. And is it really good of God to punish people eternally just because they were deceived? Because they didn't worship him the right way. They didn't have the right denomination. Is it really a fair system that someone can be deceived into thinking they're worshiping Jesus and Jesus just he doesn't care. He doesn't know you. You're going to hell.
Much instruction in the scripture to warn those people. Examine yourself whether you're in the faith, Paul said to the Corinthians. Every time you come to the Lord's table, you do a self-examination to make sure you're a genuine believer so that you're not believing something so minimally that you're believing for no good at all.
Right there. John MacArthur is encouraging you to deconstruct your faith. And he's even using the Bible to tell you to do it. He just doesn't realize it because he's got the wrong definition of deconstruction. He's not actually listening when people talk about what deconstruction is. If he would have bothered to listen to anybody's story, to really listen, he would know that that's not what it is. But right there, he's telling you, examine your faith. There's a lot of false teachings out there. Make sure that what you believe is true. Be critical about your beliefs. He's encouraging people to deconstruct, and he doesn't even realize it. He's preaching a whole sermon on why you shouldn't deconstruct, and then right there at the very beginning tells you to deconstruct. Okay, so then he goes on to talk about how Christian deconstructionists, they're not the ones who are deceived. They're not the ones who think they have a relationship with Jesus. These are the ones that know who Jesus is. They had the truth. It was revealed to them. And then they chose to walk away. And they decided to live a life apart from Jesus. They knowingly and intentionally rejected Jesus.
I don't think it's ever been quite as tempting to false disciples to abandon the church as it is today. Because being a defector from Christianity carries with it, in this culture, a kind of victimization heroism. In the past, you might not want to walk away from the church and walk away from Christ openly, publicly, because you would be shunned, you would be isolated, you would have nowhere to turn, you would be treated like a pariah, like a Judas. But today, you can go on the internet and find tens of thousands of friends who will applaud you as a hero, the same as they do those who are caught up in the lie of transgender behavior.
The first time I heard this, I had to rewind it and listen to it again and then listen to what he says after, because I was waiting for, I don't know what I was waiting on, but it wasn't that. Did you hear that? Back in the good old days, you used to be shunned. You would be ashamed to leave the church. People would treat you poorly if you left the church, but no more. Now they support you. He wants the church to treat people who are leaving the church poorly. He wants people leaving the church to be shunned, to be outcast, to be treated like a pariah. That's what he wants. That's ideal to him. Where is the love of Jesus in that? Treating people with kindness, standing up for the marginalized. So many people who are leaving the church have had bad experiences. The number one reason people are giving for leaving the church is not believing. They don't have belief. But a lot of people are also leaving because they've been hurt. They've been mistreated, and he'll talk about that in a minute. And I'm telling you, there's no empathy there. He's advocating for the shunning of people who walk away instead of supporting them, loving them, giving them the free will that their God has allegedly given them. I don't know John MacArthur's stance on free will. I would bet he's probably a Calvinist, but I don't see the love of Jesus in that, what he just said. I don't see any love or compassion or empathy. I see a man who hopes that the church members will start shunning people who leave the church. And that's exactly what a lot of them are doing. And then to compare it to this, to support of being transgender, I mean, I don't even have to go into how absolutely just ridiculous that is, especially considering Jesus never not one time talked about being transgender. He never gave rules against it. He gave rules against a lot of other things. He gave rules against judging others, mistreating other people, not forgiving other people. But he never gave a rule that says don't be transgender, yet this is what John MacArthur resorts to.
And it's directly related to and relevant to our church life today, because Christianity has so many forms under just that broad term. There are heretical churches where the gospel is not taught, the deity of Christ is not believed. Modern liberal churches, we might call them.
So he goes on and on. He lists all the different churches that are heretical, that aren't teaching the true doctrine. I just think it's so interesting that people like him stand up on a pulpit and they point their fingers at all these other denominations and everyone else who claims Christianity and says, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, and I'm right. I have the right interpretation. I have the right relationship with God. I know the divine truth. Also, I'm very humble because Jesus told us to be very humble and meek.
Let me say this, that these defections are not happening because people are studying the Bible deeply and profoundly and digging into the scripture and finding that in studying the Bible, they have concluded that Christianity isn't true. That doesn't happen.
The first video I posted here on YouTube was my story of leaving Christianity and deconstructing from it. And in it, I explain that my goal was to be a good Christian, to be a better Christian, to examine my beliefs like John MacArthur said to do. Examine your heart, make sure that you believe the right thing about God, about the Bible. And so I went into a 2-year-long journey studying the Bible. I spent money on John MacArthur's books. So to tell his congregation that nobody leaves Christianity or deconstructs from Christianity because they studied the Bible is astronomically false. Like, he could not be further off. If you go and look up why I left Christianity, why I'm deconstructing from Christianity on YouTube, you're going to find hundreds, thousands of people on YouTube, on TikTok, all over the place talking about it. And I would say that probably 80 to 90% of them studied the Bible, were devoted to the faith. They wanted to excel in their relationship with Jesus. They wanted to be a disciple for the Lord, and they wanted to share it with the world. And so they wanted to sharpen their apologetics. They wanted to learn more about their own faith so that they could better defend it. And they kept reading, and things didn't add up. And the apologetics weren't justifying the things that they were supposed to justify. And so people lost faith, they lost belief. It is a natural result of reading something that is so nonsensical It is a slap in the face to those of us who went through so much pain and anguish and study and confusion and trying so hard and praying for God to show us the truth, to help guide us through our study in the Bible, reading it and trying to become better Christians. So many of us did that, and through that journey we lost faith. And so this right here shows me he's not listening. I don't know a single person who was deconstructed from Christianity that wasn't so dedicated to it in the first place, that didn't read the Bible for themselves and weren't more dedicated than all of the people around them at their church. We read the Bible. We just didn't like what we found in it, and we didn't like the excuses and the apologetics and the cliches that were given to us when we had questions that couldn't be answered.
They talk about things like, I had a bad experience at church. Somebody abused me. Somebody was unkind to me. There were too many hypocrites. I didn't like the pastor. It was a hassle to try to be who I am. They wouldn't accept me the way I was. I feel mistreated. There was racism. There was misogyny. There was homophobia. There was Christian nationalism. And I even read several articles that said people left evangelicalism because evangelicals vote for Donald Trump. I don't think you really want to consign yourself to eternal hell because you're anti-Donald Trump.
People did not leave evangelical Christianity because people were voting for Donald Trump. People left evangelical Christianity because the people who were voting for Donald Trump were aligning themselves with his morals and his values. And those people were the people in the church. Those were the evangelical Christians. The same people that raised us in Sunday school, teaching us to be humble and meek and quiet and to love people, to show compassion, to be forgiving, to be nice, to stand up for the marginalized, to hate greed. Donald Trump stood for everything that Jesus stood against. And Donald Trump stood against everything Jesus stood for. They taught us, what would Jesus do? Love like Jesus. And we did it, and they got mad. They said, no, don't do that. Vote for this guy. Vote for Donald Trump. The guy who brags about sexually assaulting women. Who brags about his money. Who says he can do anything in the world. He could shoot someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue and nobody would care. He was nothing like the Jesus that they were feeding us. And so when we see the contradictions, and we see that everyone in the church is aligning themselves with someone that doesn't look anything like the morals that they're teaching in the church, people are going to question that. People are going to question what's going on. And they should. And my mind is blown that he says that he realizes people are leaving the church because they feel mistreated, because they're not being accepted, they're not being cared for, that there's too many hypocrites, that people were unkind, that people were abusive. He says these things. He understands that this is happening to people. And instead of loving them like Jesus, instead of going after them and showing them compassion, he wants the church to shun them. He wants the church to mistreat them even more. He goes on to say after this, the bottom line is that people just love sin. They just want to leave because they love sin. And yet he listed all of these reasons that people are leaving that to me look like sin. If sin exists, sin is mistreatment, it is abuse, it is hypocrisy, it is mistreatment, it is racism, it is misogyny, it is homophobia, it is Christian nationalism. These things should be considered a sin. He's admitting that people are leaving because of these things, but then he's flipping the narrative and saying they're leaving because they love sin. No, they're leaving because they hate sin. They're leaving because they hate the bad things that people are doing. They hate the mistreatment and abuse. They hate the hypocrisy. They don't want to align themselves with that. It's the people in the church that are staying that love their sin, the ones doing the abusing and the mistreating.
And they'll declare you a hero. And you'll be elevated. And you will also join aggressive enemies of God.
Interesting that he's saying this from a pulpit where his entire congregation thinks he's a hero, where his entire congregation is supporting him and praising him, quite literally elevating him as he preaches down at them. How funny that he's up there talking about how terrible it is that all these people go out and they're supported and elevated while he maintains an elevation above his entire congregation.
John describes them, these deconstructionists, as antichrists.
Again, he's just kind of repeating this narrative that people should be mistreated, people should be shunned, people should be demonized for walking away from the church.
Deconstruction becomes destruction.
This is just a scare tactic and it means nothing. It's not a fact. He just made it up. There's no data to suggest that this is true. And in fact, if you listen to these stories of all of these people within the deconstruction community, if you listen to their stories, you'll actually hear that most, if not all of them, have found more purpose and meaning and peace after leaving Christianity. Those that didn't find purpose and meaning and peace tend to go back to Christianity. And that's great for them. If that's what brings them hope, then more power to them. But he's not listening to the stories. He says he is, but it's obvious he's not, because most of us would agree that the reason we left is because that was not fulfilling and it wasn't satisfactory to our intellectual integrity. And now that we're on the other side, we find more purpose and meaning and peace in our lives. We're happier. He's not using people's stories to make this point. He uses the Bible verse. That's it. He just uses Bible verses to back up his biased claim that he just made up. But if you actually listen to the stories of people who deconstructed, who have left the faith, I think he'd hear a very different narrative. I just don't know that he would accept it.
People who forsake God, who once may have professed to believe in him, do so because they crave something other than him. They crave evil things.
Just a few minutes ago, he was saying the reason people were leaving is because of bad experience, because evil things were being done to them, because they were being mistreated, because they were being abused. He said it himself. But now, again, he's claiming that they're leaving because they love evil things. It's so obvious to see when you break this down that he's just throwing everything out and hoping it sticks, but none of it's actually cohesive.
And here's the first thing to say about false disciples. They are drawn by a crowd. They are drawn by a crowd in this case. They follow the crowd. They may not know what the crowd is all about, but they follow the crowd. Whether it's a mega church or a rock concert or whatever it might be, there's a curiosity and a novelty and a seduction in a crowd. Most people follow a crowd, even if they have no idea what it's gathering for.
Does he not see that he's standing in front of a large crowd speaking to people that are just accepting whatever he says blindly instead of thinking for themselves? Moving on.
They find the words too difficult. Oh, the sentiments about Jesus, great. The music about Jesus, great. But when he speaks, they're offended.
I was not offended by the words of Jesus. I was offended by the people in my church claiming to love Jesus that weren't looking or living anything like him. I was offended by the people who were standing for everything that Jesus spoke against. I was offended by the words and the attitudes and the actions and the treatment of these people that were claiming to have this relationship with Jesus but weren't following any of the red letters. They were following Paul. They were following Donald Trump. They were following whatever their pastor or conservative leader said, but they were not actually living out the words of Jesus at all. They were judging everyone. They were pointing fingers. They were casting stones, and they were doing everything that Jesus told us not to do.
You will descend to Hades. For if the miracles had occurred in Sodom, which occurred in you, it would have remained to this day. Nevertheless, I say to you that it will be more tolerable for the land of Sodom in the day of judgment than for you. I can't think of a more horrendous pronunciation. Sodom was destroyed because It was full of homosexuals who tried to rape angels.
Well, he sure is missing a good bit of this story, and yes, I did pause it, but he does not go on to continue explaining that the man in the story who offered up his daughters to be raped by these men in the city was Lot. Lot was considered a righteous man according to the New Testament. Lot and his virgin daughters were in the house when a bunch of men from the city came banging on the door and they said, "Hey, let us in. You've got some good looking men in there and we want them." And Lot said, "No, you can't have these men. These are my guests. Take my daughters instead. They're virgins. You can have them. Do whatever you want with them, but don't hurt my guest." That man, Lot, he got away. He wasn't destroyed at all. He was not destroyed in Sodom. In fact, he went on to live a righteous life according to the New Testament. But how convenient that he leaves that part out, right?
These are the exvangelicals. These are the Christian deconstructionists. They went out from us, but they were not really of us. If they had been of us, they would have, what? Remained with us. But they went out so that it would be known and shown that they all are not of us. When somebody defects, they didn't lose their salvation. They never had it.
It's really important to understand that this is a manipulation tactic. This is a way to gaslight you into questioning your own journey and your experience, but you know your journey better than anybody else does. And if you did the work, if you put the effort and the faith into finding Jesus or looking for Jesus, praying to Jesus, asking for that salvation, asking for a relationship with him, if you did that and he chose not to save you, that's on him. That's him intentionally not saving you when you did what you were supposed to do to be saved. If you never had your salvation in the first place, then that means God ignored you when you came to him. And that doesn't really align with what they tell you when you want to be saved. They do the altar call and they say, "Come up to the front, say the prayer, repent and believe. You will be saved. He'll save you right in this moment. You can guarantee that you'll go to heaven." And you do that, and then you walk away because it's all nonsensical, and they say, "Well, you were never really saved in the first place, so it doesn't matter." And that's just manipulation. It's just a tactic they use so that they can maintain their own faith, their own security in their own faith. And they don't have to believe that somebody who actually had faith could walk away.
Examine your own heart to be certain you're in the faith. Let's bow in prayer.
And then he ends by encouraging you to deconstruct your faith. Examine your faith. Deconstruct it. Carefully and critically look at your beliefs to make sure that they are true. This was such a fascinating sermon. It was all over the place. And, now that I am so far on the other side, I'm so far out of Christianity, this stuff sounds absolutely bonkers to me. And it's so easy to just look at it and see the inconsistencies and see the fallacies. But when you're new, this can be very confusing because the language that he uses is very slick. It's very tricky. And if you don't know how to spot manipulation tactics, if you don't know how to spot fallacies, it can be very easy to fall for stuff like this. And really all this is guilt and manipulation. This is tactics meant to control you, to keep you from leaving the church. And why? Why does John MacArthur not want you to leave the church? He needs people in the seats. That is his livelihood. His livelihood is the church, just like every other pastor out there. They need people clinging to Christianity. They need it to fill their pews. They need it to fill the offering plates. They need it to sell their books or their YouTube videos. They need people in Christianity to maintain their own livelihood and to maintain their own faith. This is, in my opinion, why they're discouraging people from leaving. They're scared. They see the drop in attendance. They're not stupid. They know that church attendance is dropping at a drastic rate because people, they don't find this stuff compelling anymore. We don't believe it anymore. We're not buying what you're selling. And so they have to come up with all these reasons people are leaving. They can't just look internally. They can't look around and at their doctrine, at their church, at the mistreatment, at the abuse, at the hypocrisy, at the racism, at the homophobia, at the Christian nationalism. The very things he listed. He showcased what is wrong with the church today and why people are leaving. And he still wants to focus on shunning the people leaving rather than the people that are staying and doing the things that they shouldn't be doing. He says people leaving love sin. No, people leaving hate sin. At least how a lot of us are defining it these days, which is mistreatment and abuse, which is harming people, treating people unkindly. That, to me, if sin exists, that's what sin is. And I didn't leave the church because of mistreatment, although I was mistreated. I left because I wanted to be a better Christian, because I read and studied the Bible over and over again, and I came to the conclusion that it wasn't true. It's man-made. And there would be no way to determine if anything in it is rooted in any kind of divine truth. It's all based on faith and blind belief. And Johnny here seems to think that all you have to do is follow him, follow what he says, because he's the one with the right interpretation. He's the one that has the divine truth, and everybody else is wrong. I just hope more people start coming around to critical thought, to deconstruction, to examining what you believe to make sure it's true. Advice that I would give you, and apparently advice he would give you too. He's just not realizing that he is encouraging you to deconstruct while wanting to shun you for deconstructing. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that I gave you something to think about. I hope that I gave you an alternate perspective, and I hope I shed some light on some of these false notions that are being presented by so many of these pastors and churches who are very afraid of their congregations dwindling, and they are grasping on trying their hardest to keep people from leaving, and they are resorting to a lot of different tactics to do that. And I think it's really important that people pay attention to the tactics being used to keep them under control, to keep them from thinking outside of their little bubble, because there's a lot of people out there that don't want you doing that. There's a lot of people out there that want you falling in line, blindly obeying, and anybody that wants that from you does not have your best interests at heart. So trust yourself, trust your intuition, maintain your intellectual integrity, and understand that it's okay to leave. It's okay to walk away. It's okay to not believe. It's okay to leave because you had a bad experience. It's okay to leave because people voted for Donald Trump. It's okay to leave for any reason that you want to, because you owe nobody an explanation for why you chose to leave the church. You owe nobody an explanation for why you're deconstructing. Your journey is yours alone, and you have the right to choose your path and your journey. And it is not up for men like this. It's not up for me to decide where you land. I just want you to think for yourself. I want you to critically examine your beliefs so that you can come to the best conclusion about truth. And then we all win, right? If you aren't already subscribed, please subscribe to the channel. That helps me out a lot. You can also ring the bell for notifications so that when I post new content, you will be notified. Let me know in the comments what you thought about this. Like I said, this was an experiment for me. I might do more videos like this in the future. I find it really interesting to kind of talk about both sides. It's how I deconstructed. It's what helped me kind of unpack my beliefs, listening to the conversations between both sides so that I could come to a conclusion about what I believed rather than letting someone else tell me how to think and what to believe. And I hope that you can do that too. See you next time.